Hello and welcome to the podcast. In this episode, I want to talk about emotions, but I want to talk specifically about how emotions can destroy a world, so to speak. That could be a society, culture, team, organization, business, community, and how emotions can also help build a world or a society, a team, a culture, business, organization, community. Build it in the sense that it's nourishing, it's constructive, it's helpful, it is a place and a space that you would feel safe in, and you're more likely to be able to reach your full potential, as opposed to a destructive environment which is toxic, not good for anyone, or not good for most people. To help me expand on that, I want to introduce you to what is sometimes called a triune brain model, but my version is actually more than 3 parts. It's 3 point something, because you'll see there's a computer up here, there is a boiler room here, and a furnace down here. But the 3 point something is the addition of the security guard. So 3 point whatever you want to make it. But let me explain why I've laid out my version like this. At the top is the computer. Now that's meant to represent our ability to solve problems, our logical, considered thinking. That is often the place that intellect is thought to reside. If you look around you just right now, it is likely that you will see signs of the intellect of people, the devices that they've made, the structures that they have put up. So perhaps the device you're watching this on, for example, that, if you consider it, is probably something which took the combined efforts of a lot of people, and particularly their intellect. Yes, of course, perseverance, innovation, etc. is in the mix, but it takes intelligence to construct these devices, to construct the houses that some of us at least are lucky enough to live in, to construct the roads, medicine, science, language, mathematics, physics, and so on. So that's the computer. Then in the middle we have the boiler room. Now the boiler room is meant to represent our emotional center, and the temperature of that boiler room can be, let's call it ambient, and we are aware of those emotions because they are having an impact, but maybe we're not consciously aware. And I'll come back to that in a little while. And then at the bottom we have the furnace, and this is meant to represent the emotions when they get red hot, when they totally overpower. And the security guard, well, the security guard, what they're doing is they are receiving information. If you think about it, we have to receive information from our environment all the time. We receive it through our senses and sort of things like sight and taste and touch. Sometimes, of course, also it can be a feeling in our body. That's also information. And by and large, what is happening is the thalamus is collecting that information like a nexus and then sending it out to various parts of the brain. And one area, and again, these are metaphors and analogies, one area that has got to receive that information pretty quickly is what I've called the security guard. In other words, we have to be aware if our environment is toxic or it is potentially nourishing. Is there a threat? Is there an opportunity? The security guard can turn the temperature up a bit. Now, I'm not specifying the emotions at this point in time. They could be things like irritation. They could be things like intrigue, perhaps even joy, those emotions. But the security guard can also turn that temperature up in that boiler room so high that it trips the switch and the furnace doors burst open and they blast up heat to the computer. And the computer, with its delicate circuitry where we are considering things and probabilities and balance and different perspectives, well, that circuitry gets affected and it becomes much simpler. It becomes much more binary, like a computer from many decades ago. Nothing like as sophisticated as what we have now. And the same thing can happen to our thinking. It becomes more basic. And so if the fight or flight reflex is triggered, then it is survival. It is protect ourselves, run away, or protect ourselves, defend ourselves, or defend other people. It doesn't have to be fight or flight. It's just one example of real, basic, binary thinking. So the computer is essentially dowsed down. Areas are switched off, attenuated. The thinking is much less subtle. But we're still thinking, but in a crude way. When we walk into a room, what are we doing? We're reading whether people are friendly or indifferent or perhaps engaging, perhaps welcoming. And that impacts our thinking, does it not? Even in as simple a way as us saying to ourselves, oh, they look friendly, or oh, this doesn't look good, I better get out of here. So those emotions, even though we might not readily identify them as being there, are there, by and large, pretty much all the time. But there's a difference between, of course, the type of emotion and the intensity of it. And it's that intensity that I'm hoping to highlight here. When those emotions are very intense, we can get into the furnace. And you may be saying, well, hold on a second, that's sort of fight or flight, anger. What about more, let's call them positive emotions? Absolutely, absolutely. Have you ever been like overjoyed? Do you want to go out and skip down the road? Or is that just me? Or you're in love? Or you are just ecstatic, you're happy, you've passed an exam or whatever it is. Does that impact your thinking? Does it impact your behaviours? May you do things that aren't considered to be entirely rational, like skipping down the road. It may look odd to some people if you do that because you're so overjoyed, but to you, it's exactly what you need to do. And therefore, those so-called more positive emotions can make our thinking cruder by and large, and it is easier to consider anger in terms of giving you a quick overview, but by and large, once more, our thinking isn't as subtle and nuanced as it is when the computer is activated fully, but again with emotional content, as I'll come back to once more. But just to finish off about the furnace, about those stronger emotions, think also about anger being the easiest way to describe it in terms of shorthand. If someone is angry, are they thinking about the implications of their behaviours in 6 months' time? Probably not. Are they thinking about the implications in 6 minutes' time? Probably not. They're very much in the moment. So everything's narrowed down, it's focused, it is concentrated. When our emotions are less intense and the emotions also are different, it tends to open our thinking up. We're more able to look at things from various different viewpoints and to be more balanced and considered in our decision making. Once more, if we're joyous, even although it's a pretty good outcome, we're probably not thinking about what anyone is thinking about us as we skip down the road, to use that example. And then to come back to the more subtle emotions, as our little security guard is saying, hey, this is interesting information. I just need to turn a few dials because you need to get this emotional content. I think it's important. Could be good important, could be bad important, but you need to get it. Once more, not talking about the furnace blast here, but those emotions, that heat, that change in temperature, and the various ways that the pipes and channels reach the computer can alter how we think. We're probably aware, at least very quickly after the event, we've been angry. Very often we're aware that we are angry in the middle of it. But when it's irritation, when it's dislike, when it is potentially not exactly hatred, but very much close to, let's say, disgust of another individual, then that is obviously going to be impacting the way we think, changing our internal dialogue, changing our perspective. And I don't mean to suggest for a second that almost all of us can escape getting angry from time to time, or can escape getting irritated or annoyed or whatever. Emotions are there for a reason, and those emotions could be helping us in that environment. However, what I am suggesting in terms of the world destruction or building is that when we stay in emotions that are divisive in nature, when they are about a lack of care, when they are about a dislike, when they are about a disgust, when they are about us and them over there, then ultimately what we do is we begin to fractionate into groups, and society can disintegrate to a degree. And yes, there are times we have to recognize that those differences are so great that we need to be able to move away from that situation somehow to defend ourselves and to defend the weak and the vulnerable. But overall, in terms of those positive types of emotions, I would categorize them as being empathic. So imagine a world, a team, a business, an organization that was filled with empathy rather than hate, rather than dislike, rather than not caring about anyone else. A world where we considered what we should do to help those people who are vulnerable, to help those people who are weak. A world where we can think about those people who aren't even born yet and say, what sort of world do we need to set up for them? So when we're in a world where there's no empathy, it's a bit of a disaster. And there's two ways that empathy can diminish. And or I should say, here's two ways. There are more than two, but two ways that leap out to me. Number one, we have people in power, in charge, in positions of influence who don't have the emotions at all. They're cold, they're calculating, they're like machines. It is purely the computer. Or we have people in charge who have emotions, but those emotions are about, well, their own well-being. They're totally selfish. There is a disdain, a dislike, a mistrust of others around them. We can all get angry, we can all get irritated, we can all think about other people as being so different that we don't really want to spend some time with them. In the mix, however, most of us, in my opinion, are empathic creatures. And if we practice it more, not to the detriment of ourselves, not to the detriment of our well-being, in the sense that we give so much we burn ourselves out. It's not what I'm saying. But if we practice doing good, if we practice, as I've called it before, putting a building block in the walls of society, the flying buttresses that keep it safe and secure and give us a culture that we can flourish within. If we do that every day somehow, then I believe that we make a difference. And therefore, empathy has got to be at the top of the list, or towards the top of the list, in terms of the world that we want, the society that we want, the culture that we want, the businesses that we want, the huge organizations that we actually want, the communities that we want. And in that way, that emotional content of our lives, of you and me and the people around us, can, will, and does make a difference. So where are we heading? First question. Second question, what can we do to make a difference? I would suggest an awful lot more than often we think.